Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And let's ramble on. There is a lot to talk about because I didn't have a ton of time to record while I was in Bacolod, the Philippines, for, 2 weeks maybe? A little under 2 weeks. But there was a lot going on because it was my friend's wedding. And I hadn't been to the Philippines in over a decade. It's been a long time because I did not have a super fun time in Cebu the first time I went, or Cebu, or Cebu. Everybody says the accent differently in the Philippines for a lot of cities. Like Bacolod, it seems like it's Bacolod, and a lot of the words have the emphasis on the second syllable, but Filipino people said to me, "Oh, it's actually Cebu." And I was like, oh, okay. And then someone told me, "Oh, Cebu. And I was like, "Oh, Cebu. Okay, Cebu." So I'm not going to get these pronunciations right. A ton of people spoke English in the Philippines, and I was going to be there less than 2 weeks. I'd mostly be around English-speaking people anyway because my friends getting married were English teachers. One from China, one from the Philippines. And yeah, just so many people spoke English that I didn't study the Filipino languages. Also, I think there's like a bajillion Filipino languages. So I gave up, basically. I was studying Japanese the entire time I was there so that I would be able to use Japanese in Japan, which just got here. I need more Japanese. I'll have to study a lot more, but it is helpful. Like I am talking a little bit to people, which is nice. But let's get back to the Philippines because since it had been so long and I didn't really have a good time in Cebu, it was way too hot to live at all. And that was the same as Bacolod. But the rest of the stuff I would say in Bacolod was a little more comfortable. I liked the malls more in Bacolod than in Cebu. Bacolod just looked more up to date, I guess I should say. Like the tiles weren't as cracked everywhere, and the streets were a little more put together. The streets were pretty broken in Bacolod, but they had a large like malls that you could walk to and around in, and everything looked pretty modern inside. They do have honestly, Bacolod was pretty similar to Cebu. It looks pretty broken down. The hotel that I was staying, that my friends incredibly nicely reserved for me, because they were like, "Hey, you flew all the way around the world to come to our wedding, so we got you a hotel room." How nice is that? They picked me up from the airport in Bacolod. I guess I should start a little earlier, huh? Jeez, there's so much to talk about that's happened recently. I got Wikipedia back on my phone, which is really cool. The newest app, for some reason, doesn't work, but all of the old versions of it work, and I just tested like 20 different of the older versions, the archived versions of the app, and one of them works great. So I have Wikipedia, simple Wikipedia, which is like half the size, and goes faster because Wikipedia is huge, so it takes a few seconds to load sometimes with the app. And Wiki Voyage, which is really nice to be able to use when I'm flying into a country. Just look up the country and it tells me how to get into the city, what to see, what to do, what to eat. The flights to the Philippines were kind of a mess because one of my flights was 30 minutes late, and then the flight I was supposed to catch moved up 30 minutes. So I had like a 2-hour window, and then all of a sudden I had a 50-minute window. And I was and I ran, and I had to ask the guy at the counter, and I didn't see anyone wearing a tag or anything, and I was looking around for a minute, and then I saw someone standing behind a counter, and I asked him, and he said, "Just find a security guard." And I was like, "I don't see any." And he said, "They wear a blue tag." And I was like, "Okay," because he said he couldn't help me, the guy behind the counter, and I started running around, and I saw someone with the security tag, and I told them, hey, one plane was 30 minutes late, the other's 30 minutes early. I got to get to the gate, like, now, basically. And he said, okay, just go to the Filipino passport line. So I skipped the huge, crazy line that all the foreigners have to wait in and got to go through the Filipino line because my plane was almost going to start boarding. And the border agent let me through, which was nice. And then I had to go to a different terminal, which was crazy. And this guy wearing a badge, it said airport on it, and he looked like the other airport people. And he was like, oh, that shuttle's going to take a while. Like, use one of our airport taxis. They're a little expensive, but you'll be able to get to your terminal on time. Because, this is crazy, the Filipino Manila airport has very distinct terminals that are kilometers away from each other, like a few kilometers away from each other driving. And you can't really walk to them feasibly, which is pretty rare and, as you can imagine, very inconvenient. So you have to get a shuttle bus from terminal to terminal. And this guy was like, if you only have, 45 minutes, you're not going to get there on time. Just get one of these taxis. It'll take you there, and you'll get there on time. And I had, 45 minutes before the plane departed. So I said, okay, just take me to the taxi, even though I never do. And I asked him, you are an airport employee, right? And he showed me his badge, and he was like, yes, I work for the airport. There is a free shuttle. It just takes so long, and the traffic is so crazy. Just look out here, and then look up there. We get to use that free track up there where there's no traffic. And I was like, okay. But that was weird. There was just a lot of red flags because he wanted me to take this taxi, and he was really trying to sell me on it. Anytime someone is trying to sell you something, something's wrong, basically, in my head. And he brought me to the second guy, and he explained the situation to him in Filipino, I assume. And the second guy started walking with me to a bunch of taxis, and he was like, no, it'll be very fast in English. We just get there way faster. And I asked him, I was like, do you work for the taxi company? And he said, no, I work for the airport. And I was like, well, how much is this going to cost? And it was going to cost almost 4,000 pesos, which is $68. And I was like, whoa, there's something incorrect. You guys are not just airport employees if you're trying to make me pay $68 for anything in a country where an Uber ride for an hour is like $4. So I stopped and I said, what? That's impossible. And he said, yeah, it's just expensive because you have to get to the terminal so quickly. And I was like, nope, that's not right. I will miss my flight. My airport will cover the insurance. Something is wrong here. And I told that to the guy, and I turned around and walked back. And there was the free shuttle bus like 100 meters away, and it was beeping like it was going to take off soon. So I ran toward it, just physically ran toward it with my pack on, and told them, like, hey, I got to go Terminal 2. My flight's taking off in 40 minutes. And the guy let me on the shuttle bus. It took off. I got to the shuttle like 10 minutes later, tops. So I still had 30 minutes left, and it was free because it's a free service provided by Manila because they know how insanely inconvenient their airport terminals are located. So I was now at the correct terminal. I told the people, I got to check in now. I likely already had my ticket, I think, because there were 3 flights, and on the second flight, they gave me the 2 flights for the same airline, which airlines should do, but my Japan one didn't, which is crazy to me. So I gave them my ticket. I went through security in like 10 minutes or something. I don't know. But I got to my gate. It couldn't have been 20 minutes before leaving, but maybe it was right at like when people were already boarding, because I got there, I waited in line for 1 minute, I got on the plane with the remaining few people in line, got on the plane, and I was sitting there. And so I just made it. And I don't know if those taxi people would have gotten me there in time or what. It was just so crappy that they did that. But sometimes people try and scam you, especially if you're in a rush. They know that you are not paying as close attention as you might otherwise because you have to get something done. And so they'll try and sell you services you don't need, like a special taxi to take to the terminals, even though at the Manila airport, the terminal shuttle bus are great. I had to use it again on the way out of the Philippines, and I actually went to the wrong terminal, and there and back, and it only took me 25 minutes, maybe tops. It's a very efficient system, considering how inconvenient their airport is. You can get between terminals very easy using the free shuttle at the Manila airport. So I made it to Bacolod, and I was very happy to get there on time because my friend told me while I was in Manila that he had made an arrangement with his wife's, well, soon-to-be wife's friends to come pick me up from the airport. And that was really nice. I didn't want to be late and mess up their plans, and I certainly didn't want to be late and mess up my plans. So I was happy I got to Bacolod on time, and they were waiting right out front. It is a tiny airport. Not the tiniest I've ever been to, but getting close, Bacolod. Which is surprising, because I didn't know it was... It seems like a larger city than would warrant an airport of that size. It's basically just an arrivals terminal and departures terminal. Arrivals on the first floor, departures on the second floor, and that's it. It's just one building. I got out, and I saw my friends immediately. Sean bounded out of the van and gave me a hug. He looked very excited, and Annie came out and gave me a hug as well. That is the groom and bride-to-be. And threw me into really a van. Really threw me into a van like that's the van you're picturing the right kind of van. It was just a paneled, old, kidnappery-looking van. But their friend owned it, and they picked me up, and I thought that was very nice. And they drove me into the city from the airport, and we talked and shared stories about the last couple years since I had seen them in Thailand last, where we ate great ribs and drank mojitos all day. They both seemed very excited about the wedding, but very casual because Asia's casual. It's much more chill in general. There's not as many schedules to follow, and I like that, especially down in Southeast Asia. And so here I was back in Southeast Asia, and I felt that in Indonesia also. It is nice. Like, I really liked living among the people in Indonesia, but it's still a highly conservative Muslim country, so there are schedules and cultural things you're supposed to worry about. While in the Philippines, there's like nothing you're supposed to worry about. Everything, you just walk around and have a beer and a burger and go to the malls and whatever. It's just a very relaxed atmosphere in general. So that was the nicest part of flying into Bacolod. I was like back into zero worries about culture or being different at all. And hanging out with my friends, again, that I hadn't seen in so long. That was so much fun. And Annie asked me how I liked the Philippines and how I had liked it before. And I was like, uh-oh, because I didn't have a very fun time in Cebu. It was just a big city, but it was a really empty big city. And a lot of the buildings were old and everything was cracked. And there were tons of people asking for money all the time. And already people... Bacolod didn't seem that different. Like, a lot of people were asking for money, and the hotel that I was going to be staying at was quite old and run down. But the city itself felt more lively in Bacolod than Cebu ever had. Cebu either felt dead or it felt frantic. And Bacolod just felt like a Southeast Asian city. Like, there were a lot of people, but nobody was worried about doing anything. In Cebu, when I finally did find just a mall, that was the only thing I could find to do in Cebu, a mall. Like, I didn't even find any parks, which was pretty wild. Bacolod did have a nice park that I could go running at. So yeah, I told her, I was like, Cebu was kind of just a big city. I'm not a huge fan of big cities. And Annie who hadn't been back to the Philippines in a while, she'd been living abroad in China, teaching English, said, okay, yeah, I gotta tell you, I'm pretty shocked at how behind the Philippines is in development. I thought that it was not too different from China, and she's been living in China for, I don't know, a while now. I'll say a decade-ish. I don't know, a long time. So maybe 10 years ago, it didn't look that different from what she remembered of the Philippines. But she said when she went back to the Philippines this year after having been in China, her eyes were kind of opened, and she was kind of shocked at how few modern amenities the Philippines had compared to China where she was living, which is like, especially she's married to a Chinese person. Okay, so my friends are already technically, legally married in China, but they didn't have a ceremony done. And so this was going to be the wedding ceremony, and I'm not sure, they might have actually legally got married in the Philippines too, but I'm pretty sure they just had a ceremony, but with a real pastor and all their family and friends. They both didn't want a wedding. That's why they just did the civil procedure in China, so they could be legally married, but they didn't have to pay for a giant wedding or do all this work and get everybody together because they were in a different country. And Sean didn't have a bunch of people to go to his wedding, and Annie has a billion people because she's Filipino and they have huge families. So it was just too much trouble at the time. But apparently the story is they both really like the TV show Shameless, which I've started to watch to connect to them again, because they both love that show with William H. Macy and Emmy Rossum and Jeremy Allen White as a kid, which is funny to see. And there was a wedding in that show somewhere, which is very funny and out of character for that show. And they were both watching it, and Sean turned to Annie. It had been a few years since they were legally married, and he was like, hey, you want to have a wedding? and he said, yeah, basically. And so they agreed to have a wedding. And that's how this wedding that I was going to in the Philippines happened, because of Shameless. And they were like, yeah, let's have a wedding for Annie's family. And yeah, and they did. And there's so much to talk about with just the wedding. Oh my gosh. We started watching Detroiters, and we had a fun time watching a couple of those shows. Turns out the internet in the Philippines is not super fast, and so that was a problem, but I could use my laptop and it was okay. And then we were able to watch the two shows, and Annie, I think, was getting it more than Sean, who's like from China, but the Philippines, they grow up with English. Sean's, I don't know whose English is better. They both have near fluent English, but I think Annie is able to grasp the cultural context easier, and Detroiters is all about like funny US cultural context jokes. So I think she appreciated it a little more. She was laughing at all the like funniest moments, and it was so much fun to show this to other people. And Sean was laughing too. He just didn't get all of the subtleties, I think, of the cultural jokes. But that show is so funny that he was still laughing the whole time anyway. And it was so great to share this TV show that I love with friends that I love. And it was just really fun. We hung out in my hotel room that they had got me, watching this TV show, and then just telling stories and catching up and having some beer. It was my first day outside of Indonesia, so beer was easy and everywhere to get, and cheap as heck again. So we got a few beers, and Sean and I had been drinking buddies in Beijing when we got to know each other from the English school. So we didn't go crazy, but we each had a few beers, and Annie even had some. I poured her out a little into a cup. She doesn't drink a lot, but it was a fun party seeing everybody again. And when we were on Phuket and we met in Thailand, Annie had plenty to drink, so we weren't making her drink against her will. Those were just really good mojitos. And this was not as good. This was San Miguel Light, which was, it was fine. Of all the beers there, I think the Pale Pilsen is my favorite one, the Pilsner beer that San Miguel makes. They don't have a huge selection, and the Pilsner's good enough for a regular beer that is cheap and ubiquitous. And it was really fun, drinking, telling stories, watching Detroiters with my friends, and just hanging out again for the first time in 2 years. It had been so long. Oh, and when Annie asked me what I thought of the Philippines, I explained I wasn't a huge fan of Cebu because I was just in this suburban neighborhood, and then when I went into the city, it just seemed like a large, hot city without without much, really. And Annie was like, okay, I have to be honest, I'm shocked at how behind the Philippines is. I can't believe, like, Bacolod, which I think is where she's from, she said she was surprised they didn't have sidewalks half the time, and the sidewalks were broken a lot. There weren't a lot of modern technology or stores. All the vehicles were, like, held together with string. I think there was a lot more poverty now that she had been to China, and she had been benefiting from that wealthy ecosystem. That's a rich country. That might be the richest country in the world right now, China. And then she goes back to the Philippines after having lived in China for so long. She was pretty shocked at all the poverty and broken infrastructure back in the Philippines. And she explained that to me, and I said, I'm so glad you said that. I don't want to talk bad about the Philippines, especially. This is only my first night back after 10 years, and I haven't even got to explore the city. But this city also kind of seems pretty broken down, like I remember Cebu seeing. And then Annie talked about how shocked she was and how broken down. They'd been there for, I think, a week before I had, and she said she was, like, really shocked at how broken down everything was still in Bacolod after having, lived in China and things developing so quickly. And Thailand. Thailand is also, a Southeast Asian country very close to the Philippines, but she and Sean go there all the time and love living there for a month or 2 weeks at a time because that doesn't feel left behind at all. Thailand also feels like many Thai cities feel like very modern places when you get there. And the bustle is a fun, lively, bustly city. It's not just people asking for money on the street or people with broken down 3-wheeled vehicles asking to take you for a ride somewhere, which Bacolod sort of felt like, but the people in Bacolod were all so cool. And I had a great time the entire time I was in Bacolod because I got to meet a ton of Annie's family, and I got to hang out with my buddy, Sean, who I've known he brought this up, I didn't realize, almost 14 years. I met him only a year into Beijing, something like that. So yeah, a decade and a half. Totally crazy. Blew my mind when he said that. And then we did the math, and I was like, wow, yeah, I've known you for a long time, my friend. And I got to talk about all the rest of that, but there's so much to talk about. I just want to talk about getting to the Philippines, seeing my friends for the first time, and I'll go over more of my adventures in the Philippines soon enough. Going to the wedding, really, that's the biggest thing. Going to the wedding, and then I guess Budots, I have to talk about that because I don't remember that at all from my first time, but I must have seen it. Anyway, there's more to talk about. I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Kai. You can talk to me at bitofarambler@gmail.com or bitofarambler on Lemmy and Blue Sky. Talk to you soon.